Hello guys, it's James here from Just Developers. Welcome back to our next episode of CSS. So, going to continue where we left off, um, and let's go from here really. So, I discussed that we had inline CSS and internal CSS. What we're going to be discussing now is what we call external CSS. So, okay, what is external CSS? Okay, so external CSS is essentially a file we can reference within the HTML document to point to a file that is going to hold all of our CSS. So, what's the advantage of this? Well, we had this issue where with our internal CSS, we end up with a big long list of different types of CSS. That's not something we want. So, what we can do is we can actually cut all that out, make our document look much more cleaner. It's better practice to have our external CSS. Okay, so that's external now. So that's in a file. Okay, so how do we reference? How do we pick up that we want our CSS to be picked up from our style.css? Well, that's something we can add in the head of the HTML document. Okay, so begin with link. Okay, link is a HTML um, property to say we want to link to something. Okay, so r equals style sheet. So this is basically telling it's going to be a style sheet. Okay, and then we've got our type. So our type is basically telling the document that this is going to be a text file that's going to be CSS. Okay, so then the last one is the most important out of the lot. Okay, this is her href. So this is a lot of the time for beginners where issues arise because they they basically are saying that none of their CSS is being picked up even though they've referenced it. Okay, but the problem is what new people don't realize is this part here is where you're telling the file to be picked up. So for example, I've got my main directory. Let's do this from this point of view. Okay, so we've got my, let's close that. Okay, so we've got my main directory. Okay, JustDevelopers.css. That's my main directory. Within that main directory, I have my index.html file. And then I have my style.css. So if we look at this logically, we're going to say that the style.css is within the same file directory as index.html. So within HTML, to be able to say that, all we have to do is literally type the file name. So we're saying within that directory, there is this file. If, for example, which again, please take note that this is something called good practice. Okay, we're going to create a folder called CSS. And then what we're going to do is we're going to close style.css. And we're going to click and drag and drop that into the CSS file. As you can see, my Visual Studio Code has indeed picked that up. So you might be thinking, okay, what now? Okay, so we need to update our href directory. Okay, so what we're looking at now is we've got our main directory with index.html. Okay, then we have another folder called CSS, and then we have our file style.css. So what we need to tell the HTML document is that we're no longer in the main directory. We need to look inside a folder. So to do that, we type in the folder name and then / the file name. So if we save that, as you can see, nothing's changed because it's now referencing. And to be sure that we are actually indeed looking at this file, there's something we can do. So let's open up my web browser. Okay, so if we right click and go inspect, okay, as you could see from our style.css, I'm referencing the class name, this, okay? So if we go in here and click this icon here, so you could do a shortcut of Control-Shift-C, or you can just click it. I generally just click it because I'm lazy. And then hover over the paragraph. As you can see, this is picking up that it's got a P class red. And if we look down here in our styles, we can see we've got our class. And then what you can also then see is the path of the CSS file. As you can see, red is coming up quite a few times. That's because, again, in my CSS, I declared it multiple times. Okay, so that's how we can check. And another way we can check is if we go into our head and look at our link and then just hover over that, it tells us the directory and the path of the file. So we know that directory. So we've got localhost, which is our computer, which is the local server that we're running on using that extension. And then it's picking up that our main directory for the index.html is indeed JustDevelopers CSS file. Okay, so that is looking at that path here. So it's looking at this path here. Okay, and then hover over that again. Then it's looking at the folder. So it knows that we then are in that CSS folder. And then it's looking for style.css, which is that file here. So that is literally all there is to it for referencing an external style sheet. Okay, so let's remove all those. Now, so what I generally like to do with external style sheets is to actually give a comment as to what part, what is this doing? Okay, so if we remove our default, okay, so let's go up here. And what we can do in Visual Studio is we can add a comment. So if we go into edit, so you can either do control and then / or edit and then toggle line comment. And then here we go. So I like to give a comment. Again, this is good practice to get into to basically let you to remind yourself if you come back at a later time what you're actually doing. So paragraphs. By the way, I'm not really going to go into great detail. Paragraphs in the body are red. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to change this from this to my paragraphs. So if I Control S that, we can now see all my paragraphs are red. And then what we could do next is I'll use a block comment. But as you notice, it's the same thing, okay? Well, they are and they aren't. The good thing about this is if I actually press enter a few times, I can type a few lines. So that's basically allowing us to type on multiple lines. They are the same thing, to be perfectly honest. You could do a single line or multiple line. Okay, so let's remove that, and we will go class red from body. Okay, so again, let's copy this, and when we do class name, oops, because I said class red, and then we'll change this to actually blue, actually, and then we'll change this class red from body blue writing. Save that, and as you can see, that's now blue. So that's all there is to it, to external style sheets. Next, what we're going to do is probably go on to discussing basically the beginnings of CSS. So I'll see you in the next lecture, and thanks for watching.